My girlfriend insisted we meet her parents. She trashed me in Spanish all night. She sneered, "He's just my pathetic little ATM." I thanked them in fluent Spanish. And ruined her. I have always believed that a good life, much like a well-designed building, requires a solid foundation. You cannot build a skyscraper on quicksand, and you certainly cannot build a future with someone who is fundamentally pretending to be something they are not. My name is Julian Hayes. I am 32 years old, and I work as an architect in downtown Chicago. I specialize in designing community spaces, places where people are supposed to feel grounded, safe, and connected. For a long time, I thought I had built that exact same kind of safety in my own personal life. I was wrong. Spectacularly, painfully wrong. For 2 years, I shared my life, my home, and my heart with a woman named Valerie. Valerie was 29 years old, and she worked as a public relations executive for a high-profile lifestyle brand. When I first met her at a charity gala my firm was sponsoring, I was captivated. She was the kind of woman who commanded a room without even trying. She had this effortless grace, a brilliant smile, and an energy that felt completely intoxicating to a generally quiet, pragmatic guy like me. I was the guy staring at the structural supports of the ballroom. She was the woman making everyone on the dance floor feel like they were the center of the universe. We started dating, and within a year, she moved into my apartment. It was a spacious, modern loft that I owned, right in the heart of the city. I was happy to have her there. I loved coming home to the smell of her expensive perfumes, seeing her meticulously curated wardrobe taking over our closet, and listening to her talk about the fast-paced world she navigated every day. But looking back now, with the absolute clarity that only hindsight and betrayal can provide, I realized that our relationship was essentially a public relations campaign managed entirely by her. Valerie was obsessed with appearances. Her social media feeds were heavily orchestrated masterpieces of aesthetic perfection. Every weekend brunch, every casual walk in the park, every date night was an opportunity to showcase a flawless, aspirational life to her thousands of followers. I did not mind it at first. I figured it was just an occupational hazard of her industry. If she wanted to spend 20 minutes getting the perfect angle of her avocado toast before we could eat, I would just sit there, sip my black coffee, and smile. I loved her, so I accommodated her. I believed that underneath the filters and the hashtags, there was a genuine, loving partner who was just trying to survive in a superficial world. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, time and time again, completely ignoring the hairline fractures that were forming in the foundation of our relationship. I thought we were heading toward marriage. I thought she was my forever. I was just a naive guy, happily living inside a beautifully decorated illusion. To understand the magnitude of what happened later, you need to understand something deeply personal about me. Something that I do not share with just anyone. If you looked at me, Julian Hayes, a guy with sandy brown hair and a wardrobe consisting mostly of gray suits and plain t-shirts, you would assume I am as traditionally, purely American as apple pie. And on my father's side, you would be right. He was born and raised in Ohio, a hardworking man who taught me the value of a firm handshake. But my mother was different. Her name was Elena. My mother was born and raised in Seville, a breathtakingly beautiful city in southern Spain. She moved to the United States in her early 20s, fell in love with my dad, and stayed. For my entire childhood, the walls of our home vibrated with the rhythms of her homeland. She cooked with heavy pours of olive oil and rich saffron. She played vibrant flamenco music on Sunday mornings. And, most importantly, she spoke to me almost entirely in Spanish. It was not just a language I learned in a classroom, it was the first language I ever knew. It was the language she used to sing me to sleep, the language she used to scold me when I tracked mud into the house, and the language she used to tell me she loved me. By the time I was a teenager, I spoke flawless, unaccented Castilian Spanish. It was our secret world, a cultural bond that tied me directly to her heart. Then, when I was 16 years old, she was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. We watched her fade away over 6 agonizing months. When she took her last breath, a massive part of my world went dark. After she died, everything changed. Hearing the Spanish language, let alone speaking it, felt like swallowing broken glass. It was too painful. It brought back memories of her voice that I was not ready to process. So, I packed my heritage away into a quiet, locked room inside my mind. I stopped speaking it. I stopped listening to the music. I buried it to survive the grief. Over the years, it just became a silent part of my identity. Valerie knew my mother had passed away. I told her that very early on in our relationship. But here is the thing about Valerie. She was never one for details unless they directly benefited or affected her. She knew my last name was Hayes, she knew my dad lived in Ohio, and she just assumed my mother was the exact same. In 2 entire years of dating, sharing a bed, and planning a future together, she never once asked about my mother's background. She never asked what her maiden name was. She never asked where she grew up. My fluency in Spanish was a massive, foundational part of who I am, and it remained a secret not because I was actively trying to hide it from her, but simply because she was never curious enough about me to discover it. About 1.5 years into our relationship, Valerie started a new campaign. The mission was straightforward but exhausting. I needed to formally meet her parents. Her father, Mateo Reyes, and her mother, Rosa, lived in a sprawling, pristine house in Oak Brook, an affluent and famously quiet suburb outside of Chicago. I was not afraid of commitment, and I certainly was not afraid of meeting the people who raised the woman I loved. But I was hesitant because of the way Valerie constantly talked about them. According to her, Mateo and Rosa were intensely traditional, incredibly strict, and highly critical of anyone who entered their inner circle. She painted a picture of a household where status, wealth, and public perception were the only currencies that mattered. She told me her father was a self-made businessman who demanded perfection, and her mother was the ultimate gatekeeper of their social standing. Every time the topic came up, Valerie would pace around our living room, biting her nails, explaining that this dinner had to be absolutely flawless. "You don't understand, Julian," she would say, adjusting her perfectly styled hair in the mirror. "They judge everything. They will look at the shoes you wear, the car you drive, the way you hold your fork. I need you to be perfect. I need them to see that I chose a winner." Hearing your girlfriend refer to you as a potential winner in a high-stakes family pageant is not exactly the most romantic feeling in the world. It felt less like I was being introduced to my future family and more like I was being prepped for a hostile corporate takeover. She gave me endless rules. I was not supposed to talk too much about my architectural theories because her father found art degrees to be, in her words, functionally useless. I was supposed to emphasize my firm's revenue and my recent promotion. I was supposed to sit up straight, agree with whatever political opinions Mateo brought up, and compliment Rosa's home decor at least 3 separate times. Despite the mounting pressure and the slight insult to my actual personality, I agreed. I loved her, and I figured this was just the anxiety talking. I assumed that once we got there, they would just be normal parents who wanted the best for their daughter. I marked the date on my calendar for a Friday night in late October. I bought a new, expensive navy blue suit specifically for the occasion, just to make her happy. I had no idea that I was not preparing for a family dinner. I was dressing up for my own execution. Before we get to the dinner that destroyed everything, I need to provide some context. I need to explain the financial reality of our relationship, because it is the exact thing Valerie used to humiliate me later that night. On social media, and in front of her high-powered public relations friends, Valerie projected the image of a fiercely independent, highly successful modern woman. She always talked loudly about how we were a modern couple, splitting everything 50-50, building an empire together. The truth was entirely different. As an architect at a prestigious firm, I made a very comfortable living. In fact, I made more than double what Valerie earned. But because she insisted on maintaining a lifestyle that was vastly out of her tax bracket, I ended up absorbing almost all of our living expenses. I owned the apartment, so there was no rent, but I paid all the property taxes, the homeowners association fees, the utility bills, and the groceries. Whenever we went out to dinner with her friends at upscale downtown restaurants, My credit card was always the one quietly handed to the waiter under the table, while she smiled and told everyone we were treating them. I never complained. I viewed my money as our money. I wanted her to be happy and stress-free. But there were moments that should have shaken me awake. The biggest red flag was the Miami trip incident, which happened about 6 months before the dinner. We were flying down to Florida for a long weekend to celebrate her promotion. I had already paid for the flights and the luxury beachfront resort. The morning of the flight, we were standing at the airport terminal when she handed me a new boarding pass. She had secretly upgraded both of our tickets to first class. "Surprise," she said, kissing my cheek. "We deserve a little luxury, right? Self-care is so important." I smiled, thinking it was a grand, generous gesture on her part. That was until the end of the month when my credit card statement arrived in the mail. There it was, a charge for $2,400 from the airline. She had used the credit card I gave her for emergency groceries to upgrade our flights, and she never said a word about paying it back. When I gently brought it up, she acted deeply offended. She cried, accusing me of being stingy and not supporting her need to celebrate her hard work. She twisted the argument so brilliantly that I actually ended up apologizing to her for bringing it up. I convinced myself that the money did not matter as much as her happiness. I was willfully blind to the fact that I was actively funding a lifestyle she was using to boost her own ego. The financial exploitation was one thing, but the absolute disrespect for my personal values was another. Valerie was completely consumed by the illusion of status. It was not enough for us to just be happy. We had to look incredibly wealthy and successful to anyone who happened to glance in our direction. A perfect example of this was the watch incident. For my 30th birthday, my father had given me a vintage, silver mechanical watch that had belonged to my grandfather. It was not a famous brand, it was heavily scratched on the back, and the leather strap was worn out. But to me, it was priceless. It was a piece of my family history, a quiet reminder of the hardworking men who came before me. I wore it every single day. A few weeks before her company's annual holiday gala, she came home with a shiny, heavy black box. Inside was a massive, gaudy, gold-plated designer watch. The brand logo took up half the dial. It was loud, incredibly flashy, and completely opposite to my personal style. "I got you an early Christmas present," she announced, snapping the watch onto my wrist. "You need to wear this to the gala next week. The CEO of my company is going to be there, and I cannot have you shaking his hand wearing that beat-up old antique your dad gave you. It makes you look like a substitute teacher. This new one makes you look like a partner at your firm." I stared at the heavy gold monstrosity on my wrist, feeling a sudden, sharp ache in my chest. She was casually dismissing a cherished family heirloom because it did not possess the correct designer logo to impress people she barely even liked. I tried to explain why my grandfather's watch meant so much to me, but she just rolled her eyes inside, telling me I was being overly sentimental and embarrassing her. I swallowed my pride. I took off my grandfather's watch, placed it gently in my drawer, and wore the heavy gold one to the gala. I spent the entire night feeling like an absolute fraud, holding a glass of champagne, pretending to be the flashy, wealthy boyfriend she desperately wanted me to be. I was sacrificing tiny pieces of my dignity, day by day, all in the name of keeping the peace. Despite all of these glaring warning signs, my mind remained stubbornly fixed on the future. I genuinely believed that her obsession with status was just an insecurity she would eventually outgrow once she felt truly secure in our relationship. I wanted to give her that security. So, a month before the dreaded dinner with her parents, I started setting a massive plan into motion. I went to a private jeweler in the city. I spent weeks working with him, picking out the perfect 2-carat diamond and designing a custom platinum engagement ring. It cost me a small fortune, money I had been quietly saving for years. At the same time, I booked a fully paid, 2-week luxury vacation to Rome, Italy, for her upcoming 30th birthday. I reserved a premium suite at the famous Hotel de Russi. My plan was to endure this high-pressure dinner with her parents, get their formal blessing, and then propose to her under the stars in Rome a few weeks later. On the evening of the dinner, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting my tie. I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the small, velvet box containing the custom ring. I decided to bring it with me for good luck. It was my anchor. Whenever the dinner got too stressful, I would just touch the box in my pocket and remind myself of the beautiful future we were going to build. The drive to the Oak Brook suburbs took exactly 45 minutes. The atmosphere inside the car was thick with tension. Valerie sat in the passenger seat, aggressively touching up her makeup in the sun visor mirror, reciting a final list of rules. "Remember, Julian," she said, her voice tight and anxious. "Do not mention that your firm lost that city contract last month. My father hates losers. If they ask about our apartment, emphasize that it is in the luxury district and casually mention the square footage. And please, whatever you do not try to make any of your weird, dry architectural jokes. Just smile, agree with my dad, and let me handle the heavy lifting." I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I felt like an actor being given last-minute stage directions for a play I did not even want to be in. I took a deep breath, patted my jacket pocket to feel the ring box, and nodded. "I understand, Valerie. I will follow your lead." We pulled up to the massive, imposing gates of the Reyes family estate. The house was enormous, intimidating, and completely devoid of any warmth. I parked the car, took one last deep breath to calm my racing heart, and stepped out into the crisp October air. The trap was set, the stage was perfectly arranged, and I was about to walk right into the center of it. Thank you for watching the first part of the story. If you enjoyed it, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with the name of the city you live in. Every comment helps the video reach a wider audience. Thank you so much. The moment we crossed the threshold of the Reyes estate, the air changed. It was cold, heavy, and smelled faintly of expensive floor wax and old, dusty traditions. Mateo and Rosa were waiting for us in the grand foyer. Mateo was a tall, imposing man with silver hair and a gaze that felt like it was searching for a weakness in my character. Rosa was shorter, draped in a silk shawl, her expression composed but utterly devoid of any welcoming warmth. "Julian," Mateo said, his voice a deep rumble as he gave me a firm, crushing handshake. "Valerie has told us some things about you." I smiled politely, trying to ignore the subtle warning in his tone. "It is an honor to finally meet you, Mr. Reyes. You have a beautiful home." We were led into a formal dining room that felt more like a museum than a place for a family meal. The table was mahogany, polished to a mirror finish, and set with silver that looked like it had not been touched in decades. As soon as we sat down and the appetizers, delicate plates of bruschetta and thin slices of jamon, were served, the theater began. Valerie leaned toward her mother and started speaking in a rapid, fluid Spanish. It was like a switch had been flipped. Her voice, which was usually light and melodic when she spoke to me in English, took on a sharper, almost jagged edge. She looked at me, gave me a brilliant, fake smile, and patted my hand affectionately. "I am just telling them how excited we are to be here," she said to me in English. "We will switch back to English in just a minute, I promise. My parents just feel more comfortable this way for the first few minutes." I nodded, maintaining my pleasant expression. I took a small bite of the bruschetta, chewed slowly, and listened. I listened as the woman I had planned to spend my life with told her parents in perfect Spanish that I was, quote, "sweet, but completely unrefined." She laughed as she described my wardrobe to them, telling her mother that she had to practically dress me like a toddler so that I would not embarrass her in public. She told them that I lacked any real class and that she was essentially performing a public service by staying with a guy who was so plain and unremarkable. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I was sitting there, a guest at a table I had been nervous to join, watching the person I loved turn me into a punchline in a language she thought was a secret code. I realized then that this was not a dinner. This was a trial, and Valerie was both the prosecutor and the star witness against me. I decided, right then and there, to keep my secret. I would stay silent. I would be the unremarkable guy she wanted them to see, and I would wait to see just how deep her betrayal went. The appetizers were cleared, and a steaming bowl of traditional garlic soup was placed in front of us. The aroma was rich and familiar, reminding me so much of my mother's kitchen that for a fleeting second, I felt a wave of homesickness. But that feeling was quickly crushed by the conversation happening across the table. Rosa looked at me, her eyes narrowed with a mix of curiosity and disdain. She asked Valerie a question in Spanish, something about what I did for a living and whether I was stable enough for their daughter. Valerie didn't even hesitate. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, and began to dismantle my professional life piece by piece. He works as an architect, yes, Valerie told them in Spanish, her tone dripping with feigned disappointment. But he is not exactly a high flyer. He is stuck in a tiny cubicle at a mid-sized firm, doing the boring work that nobody else wants to do. He has no real drive, no ambition to be a partner or start his own business. He is just happy to collect his little paycheck every 2 weeks and come home to play video games. Mateo grunted, a sound of pure disapproval. He looked at me as if I were a bug he was considering stepping on. Valerie continued, warming up to her lies. She told them that she was the one with the real career, the one who was climbing the corporate ladder while I just drifted along in her wake. She claimed that she had to constantly push me to even ask for a raise, and that my lack of initiative was a constant source of stress for her. Every word was a staggering fabrication. Only a month ago, I had been named a junior partner at my firm, a milestone I had worked toward for nearly a decade. It came with a significant salary increase and a corner office, not a cubicle. I had shared that news with her over a bottle of expensive champagne that I paid for. She had hugged me, told me how proud she was, and then turned around and told her parents I was a lazy, uninspired failure. I sat there, carefully spooning the soup into my mouth, nodding whenever Rosa looked my way. I felt a strange, detached kind of calm wash over me. It was like watching a building I had carefully designed being demolished by a wrecking ball in slow motion. I wasn't just angry. I was fascinated by the sheer ease with which she lied. She wasn't even flustered. She was enjoying herself. She was building a narrative where she was the long-suffering saint, and I was the heavy anchor dragging her down. I reached into my pocket and felt the velvet ring box. It felt like a piece of lead. The future I had imagined for us was evaporating with every spoonful of soup. By the time the main course arrived, a massive, perfectly cooked ribeye steak with roasted vegetables, the tension in my chest had tightened into a hard, cold knot. Mateo was now leading the conversation, his voice booming as he talked about the importance of financial legacy and the responsibility of a man to provide for his family. He looked at me and asked, in broken English, if I was prepared to take care of his daughter in the manner she was accustomed to. Before I could even open my mouth to answer, Valerie jumped in. This was the moment she delivered the insult that would become the title of my new life. "Oh, Papa," she said in Spanish, laughing a light, tinkling sound that now sounded like breaking glass to my ears. Julian tries, he really does. But let's be honest. He can barely take care of himself. I am the one who handles the heavy lifting in our relationship. I pay for our nice dinners, our weekend getaways, and the clothes he's wearing right now. She leaned closer to her mother, her eyes gleaming with a cruel sort of pride. Honestly, he's just my pathetic little ATM. My cajero automatico patetico. He makes just enough to cover the boring stuff like the electric bill, and then he hands over the rest so I can make sure we actually look like a successful couple. He's easy to control because he's so desperate to keep me. As long as I keep him on a short leash, he'll keep funding my lifestyle without a single complaint. My cajero automatico patetico. My pathetic little ATM. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I thought about the thousands of dollars I had spent on her credit card bills. I thought about the luxury apartment I owned that she lived in for free. I thought about the Miami trip she had stolen from me, and the designer bags she insisted were investments that I had paid for. To her, I wasn't a partner. I wasn't a man she loved. I was a financial tool, a mindless machine that dispensed money whenever she pressed the right buttons. Rosa chuckled, a dry, elegant sound. Well, As long as he is useful, I suppose he has a purpose, she replied in Spanish. Valerie smiled at me then, a wide, loving expression that was so full of fake warmth it made me want to be sick. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We were just talking about how much we love our little apartment, she lied to me in English. And how lucky I am to have someone as supportive as you. I looked her right in the eyes, my face a mask of polite gratitude. I'm the lucky one, Valerie, I said, my voice steady and calm. I'm learning so much about our relationship tonight. It's been very illuminating. She didn't suspect a thing. She just squeezed my hand again and turned back to her steak, blissfully unaware that the pathetic little ATM was about to shut down her account for good. The final course was served, coffee and a rich, golden flan. The atmosphere in the room had shifted into something almost celebratory for the Reyes family. They clearly felt they had properly vetted me and found me to be a harmless, easily manipulated addition to their daughter's life. But Valerie wasn't finished. She wanted to twist the knife one last time. The conversation turned to culture and heritage. Mateo mentioned how proud he was of their Spanish roots and asked if I had any interest in learning the language of their ancestors. Valerie didn't even let the question hang in the air for a second. She scoffed, a loud, dismissive sound. Julian? Learning Spanish? Papa, don't be ridiculous. He's a typical, ignorant American. He has no interest in anything that didn't happen in a football stadium or a burger joint. I've tried to teach him a few basic words, but it's like talking to a brick wall. He's completely uncultured. It's actually quite embarrassing when we go out with my friends. I have to apologize for him all the time. She looked at me, her expression full of mock pity. It's okay though. He doesn't need to be smart or cultured as long as he's a good provider, right? Then she delivered the final blow. She turned back to her parents and said in Spanish, "He's too stupid to even know we are laughing at him right now. Look at him, just sitting there with that vacant smile on his face. He's like a loyal dog that doesn't realize it's being made fun of. It makes me laugh every time." That was the moment the last thread of my patience snapped. It wasn't just the lies about my career or the exploitation of my bank account. It was the casual, arrogant dismissal of my intellect and, most importantly, the mockery of the very language that connected me to my dead mother. She was using the language of my heart, the language that Elena had used to sing me lullabies, as a weapon to call me stupid. She was defiling the one sacred thing I had left of my heritage. A cold, hard resolve settled over me. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to throw my coffee. I was an architect. I knew that the best way to destroy a rotten structure was not to hit it with a hammer, but to pull out the one single support beam that held the whole thing up. I waited for a moment of silence. I waited until they were all looking at me, expecting me to say something polite in English so they could laugh at me again. I set my coffee cup down with a soft, deliberate click. I took a deep breath, looked Mateo Reyes directly in the eye, and allowed the language I had suppressed for 16 years to come pouring out of my mouth, as natural as breathing. El placer ha sido todo mío, Señor Reyes, I said. The pleasure has been all mine, Mr. Reyes. I spoke in perfect, unaccented, formal Castilian Spanish. The kind of Spanish that only someone raised in the heart of Seville could produce. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if I had detonated a flashbang grenade in the middle of the dining room. Rosa's dessert spoon clattered loudly onto her china plate. Mateo froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips, his eyes widening until I could see the whites all around them. But it was Valerie's reaction that I will never forget. Every ounce of color drained from her face in a single second. She turned a shade of sickly, ghostly white that I didn't think was humanly possible. Her mouth hung open, but no sound came out. She looked like she was staring at a ghost that had just climbed out of a grave to point a finger at her. The dinner was truly delicious, I continued in Spanish, my voice calm, melodic, and terrifyingly polite. I turned to Rosa. "And Mrs. Reyes, your hospitality is as legendary as Valerie described. It is such a shame that our evening has to end on such a clarifying note." I looked back at Valerie. She was trembling. She tried to speak, her voice a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. "Julian, you speak. I speak the language of my home, Valerie, I said, still in Spanish. The language my mother, Elena, spoke to me every day of my life until the day she died. The language you just used to call me a pathetic ATM and a loyal dog. You thought your secret code was a wall you could hide behind. You didn't realize it was actually a window, and I've been watching you through it for the last 2 hours. The silence in the room was suffocating. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, sounding like a countdown. Matteo looked from me to his daughter, his expression shifting from shock to a deep, dawning rage. He was a man of pride, and he had just realized his daughter had humiliated him by bringing a man into his house and treating him like a fool in front of him. Valerie, Matteo growled, his voice low and dangerous. What have you done? I didn't wait for her to answer. I wasn't finished with my demolition. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't need the internet. I had everything saved. Since you were so concerned about my dead-end career, Senor Reyes, I said, sliding the phone across the mahogany table toward him. This is the official announcement of my junior partnership at one of the top architectural firms in Chicago. It was issued last month. My salary is currently 3 times what your daughter told you it was. Matteo leaned in, squinting at the screen. I saw his jaw tighten. I didn't stop there. I swiped the screen to the next document. And here is the itinerary for the trip to Rome I booked for Valerie's birthday. First-class tickets, a suite at the Hotel de Russi, all paid for in full by me. Her pathetic ATM. I believe she told you she was the one funding our lifestyle. It seems there has been a very expensive misunderstanding. I finally reached into my other pocket and pulled out the small, velvet box. I didn't open it. I just placed it on the table in front of Valerie. In this box is a custom-designed platinum ring. I spent 3 months working with a jeweler to make it perfect for you. I was going to propose to you in Italy. I was going to ask you to be my wife. Valerie's eyes filled with tears. A single, heavy drop rolled down her cheek, leaving a dark streak in her expensive foundation. Julian, please. I can explain. I wanted them to like me. By making me look like a loser? I interrupted, my voice finally losing its polite warmth and taking on a hard, icy edge. By using the language of my late mother to mock my intelligence? You didn't just lie to them, Valerie. You betrayed the very essence of who I am. You viewed my love as a weakness to be exploited and my bank account as a resource to be drained. I stood up from the table. I felt a profound sense of lightness, as if a massive weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The illusion was gone, and I was finally standing on solid ground. Thank you for the flan, Mrs. Reyes, I said, giving her a short, respectful nod. And Mr. Reyes, I am truly sorry you had to witness this. You deserved a better daughter than the one who sat at this table tonight. I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could hear the explosion of Matteo's voice beginning as I reached the foyer. I walked out the front door, stepped into the cold October night, and realized I had never felt more alive. The drive back from Oak Brook to downtown Chicago was the longest 45 minutes of my life. Valerie had followed me out of the house, sobbing and begging, and, because it was my car and we lived together, I had no choice but to let her in. But I made one rule: if you say one word, I will pull over on the shoulder of the highway and leave you there. She believed me. We drove in a silence so thick and heavy it felt like it was crushing the air out of the car. I focused on the road, watching the city skyline grow larger on the horizon, feeling absolutely nothing for the woman sitting in the passenger seat. The love I had felt for her hadn't just died, it had been incinerated. When we finally walked into my loft, the dam broke. She exploded into a frantic, desperate mess of words. She threw herself at my feet, literally clutching at my knees, wailing about how she was insecure, how her parents always put so much pressure on her to marry someone elite, and how she thought making me look like someone she had saved would make her look more impressive to them. It was just a game, Julian. I didn't mean it. I love you. I want to go to Italy. Please, look at the ring. I stepped back, detaching her hands from my legs with a cold, steady strength. I looked around at the beautiful apartment I had built, an apartment filled with her things, her expensive candles, her curated art books, her presence that was now revealed to be a poison. "This isn't a game, Valerie," I said, my voice weary. "This is my life. It's my mother's memory. It's my hard work. You didn't just lie, you built a whole world out of those lies. And tonight, that world burned down. You are not going to Italy. You are not wearing that ring. And you are not staying here." I walked to the closet, pulled out 2 of her largest suitcases, and threw them onto the bed. "The lease is in my name. I pay the bills. I want you out of here by Friday. You can take whatever you can fit in your car tonight, and I'll have movers bring the rest to your parents' house next week. We are done." She stared at me, her face crumbling as the finality of my words finally sank in. She realized there was no PR campaign she could run to fix this. There was no filter she could apply to make this look better. She had lost the ATM, she had lost the apartment, and she had lost the man she never truly bothered to know. The week that followed was a grim, logistical affair. Valerie moved out in small, resentful stages, eventually disappearing on Friday morning without a goodbye. I changed the locks that afternoon. On Sunday evening, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered it cautiously. "Julian," a heavy, tired voice said. "It is Matteo Reyes." I sat down on my sofa, looking out at the city lights. "Hello, Mr. Reyes. I am calling to apologize," he said, and I could hear the genuine shame in his voice. "I have not slept since that dinner. My wife and I, we are deeply humiliated. We did not raise our daughter to be a liar. We did not raise her to be cruel. What she did to you, and what she said about your mother, it is unforgivable. In our culture, respect for parents and heritage is everything. She failed you and she failed us." He told me that they had had a long, brutal confrontation with Valerie. They had cut off her allowance and told her she was on her own. They were making her go to therapy and had essentially put her on social probation. "She lost a good man," Matteo concluded. "And I lost a daughter I thought I knew." "I am sorry, Julian." "Thank you, Matteo," I replied. "That means a lot to me." A month later, I stood in the heart of the Santa Cruz Quarter in Seville, Spain. I had sold the engagement ring for $18,000. I took that money and booked a trip, but not the one I had planned. I went alone. I walked the narrow, winding streets where my mother had played as a child. I sat in the quiet, cool pews of the church where she was baptized. I ate tapas at the small bars where the air was thick with the beautiful, rapid-fire Spanish I had once hidden away. But I wasn't hiding anymore. I spoke to the locals. I shared stories. I laughed. I realized that Valerie hadn't taken anything from me. In fact, her betrayal had forced me to unlock the very part of myself I had been missing for 16 years. I wasn't just an architect in Chicago anymore. I was Julian Hayes, a man who carried the soul of Seville in his blood. I stood on a bridge overlooking the Guadalquivir River at sunset, the gold and orange light reflecting off the water. I thought about the velvet box I had left on a table in Oak Brook, and I felt nothing but peace. The foundation of my life was finally, for the first time, built on the truth. And that is a structure that can never be torn down. Looking back, some mutual friends said I was too harsh for exposing her in front of her conservative parents instead of handling it privately. So, am I the jerk for waiting until the end of the dinner to completely nuke her life? Or did she get exactly what she deserved? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and leave your verdict in the comments below. See you in the next dramatic story.